apoyar a la comunidad para que se puedan organizar, es muy importante. Y también nosotros quizá como organización nacional, la Alianza Nacional TPS, ¿verdad? Estamos haciendo algunas acciones a lo cual pues, me gustaría invitar a todos acá que nos puedan acudir a lo que es la Alianza Nacional TPS a nivel nacional para formar parte de los equipos locales, de los comités de base que están en las diferentes ciudades y de esa manera pues poder apoyar a la comunidad tepeciana que en este momento está muy vulnerable, porque recordemos ya son 12 países los que han sido cancelados del TPS y el miedo a exponerse públicamente es tan grande, ¿verdad? Que es en este momento en donde se va a necesitar ese apoyo de los aliados, tanto de las organizaciones comunitarias como las personas que tienen una estabilidad migratoria ya en este país, ciudadanos y todo. Entonces es cuando se va a necesitar ese gran apoyo. Viene una serie de actividades, una serie de vigilias en señal de alzar la voz, porque el día 29 de abril se va a llevar a cabo un evento muy importante en la Corte Suprema de Justicia, en la cual se puede de eso, del resultado, ahí puede depender el futuro de toda la comunidad tepeciana que estaban o han estado protegidos, que siguen protegidos hasta el momento, o los futuros beneficiarios que puedan haber en el futuro de cualquier país que sea. Se va a estar escuchando un caso en la Corte Suprema de Justicia, va a ser una audiencia muy importante, el resultado va a ser bien importante y la invitación es que todos los aliados puedan alzar la voz junto a la comunidad tepeciana al frente de la Corte Suprema de Justicia y hacerse ver, ¿verdad? Hacerse escuchar y resaltar la contribución que esta comunidad ha venido haciendo ya por casi 3 décadas y que no es justo que se estén desechando, ¿verdad? Por cuestiones caprichosas. Va a ser el día 29 de abril, ¿verdad? Al frente de la Corte Suprema de Justicia. Nosotros somos parte también de un comité aquí local, ¿verdad? Que trabajamos en el área del DMV, vamos a estar haciendo algunas actividades y por ahí vamos a estar mandando información, anda un listado ahí para tener los contactos, para poderles enviar la información de dónde vamos a estar haciendo algunas actividades y como decía, ¿verdad? La comunidad tepeciana había estado con el valor de exponerse públicamente. Ahora que se les ha quitado esa protección, pues más vulnerables, el miedo existe y estamos implorando el apoyo de la comunidad ciudadana, ¿verdad? De este país, de los diferentes países, ¿verdad?
Gracias, Bardoel, es muy importante, ¿verdad? Nosotros vamos a estar, digo nosotros porque también somos parte de la alianza, vamos a estar compartiendo la información con ustedes. Esperamos de que juntos, por lo menos hagamos una vigilia todas las semanas allí en la grada de la Corte Suprema. Es importante ganar el apoyo de la opinión pública, porque la decisión de la Corte Suprema no va a ser una decisión legal, es una decisión política. ¿Verdad? Allí o nos retroceden en cuanto a nuestros derechos, o con el apoyo de toda la comunidad podemos lograr que esta gente siga, continúe siendo protegida. Y una última pregunta alrededor de esto: ¿qué señales nos indicarían que el miedo está cediendo y que la comunidad se siente más segura? Bueno, le damos la palabra. La dama primero, la dama.
Son creo que 2 cosas. Al principio, el año pasado, siento que ya no se veían tantas personas como en las calles como antes, disfrutando con sus niños. Entonces estamos viendo personas que están regresando a eventos comunitarios, regresando a sus organizaciones. Sí, yo creo que eso es una señal. También al principio, cuando yo invitaba fueran a una protesta, a una reunión, me decían, no, yo jamás, nunca voy a ir, no quiero ir. Y ahora esas mismas personas son las que veo en las redes sociales que sí están ya yendo a diferentes protestas. Entonces, creo que hay personas que se están sintiendo un poco más valientes y ya empiezan a salir un poco más.
Un par de señales. Una, que por fin los demócratas en el Congreso están mostrando un poco de espina dorsal o backbone, como dicen, y se le están parando a Trump con el presupuesto. Ahora sí no quieren dar dinero para ICE. Esa es una. Otra señal es en estados como Virginia, el primer acto que hizo la gobernadora que íbamos a elegir el año pasado fue quitar el hecho de que la policía estatal fueran básicamente agentes de inmigración. Ella quitó esa orden ejecutiva que había hecho el gobernador anterior. Los gobiernos locales están actuando. En Montgomery County ganamos el Trust Act, hace un par de semanas se firmó. En Maryland, el 287G, que CASA y nosotros y otras organizaciones empujamos había 7 condados que estaban cooperando con inmigración, ahora ya no lo pueden hacer. Y muchas otras cosas. Obviamente ya cuando no se ve la Guardia Nacional, lo veo más en el centro que en los barrios donde se necesita seguridad, o cuando los agentes de inmigración ya estén fuera de nuestras calles, no solo en Washington, sino en otros estados también. Esas van a ser algunas señales y obviamente, como dijo mi compañera acá, cuando la gente comience a acudir más a reuniones, a una de las reuniones sindicales que tenemos, hay miembros que tienen miedo de participar, ¿verdad? Entonces, cuando la gente comience a salir a los parques, que no le dé miedo ir a comprar su comida o llevar a los niños a la escuela o ir a la iglesia, esas van a ser otras señales también.
Yo recuerdo hace poco más de un año, creo ya, cuando fueron atacadas las primeras ciudades de manera brutal, con crueldad. Eso tuvo un impacto grande en la comunidad, pero la señal más importante ahí fue la solidaridad de las personas nativas de este país y personas nacionalizadas en este país que se organizaron y salieron en defensa de la comunidad migrante, ¿verdad? Donde hicieron resaltar las contribuciones que toda la comunidad migrante hace a nivel nacional. Eso es fundamental. Y también cada día vemos más el impacto de todas las actividades de abogacía que está haciendo la comunidad en los gobiernos locales y pasando resoluciones públicamente en apoyo a la comunidad migrante. Es un país de migrantes y por lo tanto pues ese grupo que nos quiere dividir, separar y destruir, pues tiene que ser contrarrestado con la valentía de los gobiernos locales, ¿verdad? Eso es fundamental. Y los gobiernos locales a la comunidad migrante que está de manera irregular, generalmente no la escucha mucho, pero sí escucha a las personas que cada 4 años van a marcar bajo su fotografía para poderlos elegir. Por eso es que es importante el apoyo de la comunidad ciudadana a nivel de todas las comunidades.
Bueno, para ir cerrando también es importante el llamado a la acción desde su liderazgo y experiencia. ¿Qué compromiso concreto pedimos hoy al público? Así brevemente.
Abajo hay el Legal Women Voters, que son una organización en donde ellas les pueden ayudar a registrarse a votar, por acaso que no se han registrado todavía.
Seguir apoyando a la comunidad, seguir hablando con las personas que no lo pueden hacer o que tienen miedo de hacerlo, a seguir participando en las actividades públicas que se van haciendo, y sí, 100%, si conoce a una persona que puede hacerse ciudadana y no lo ha hecho, por favor, sea en el estado que sea, que lo haga cuanto antes. Y recordémonos otra vez el punto que tú hiciste temprano, es muy importante, que es que en Washington hay elecciones de alcalde en este año y la gente que vive aquí en Washington DC y son inmigrantes sí pueden votar, así que ayudarle y informar a nuestra gente acerca de eso, porque creo que mucha gente todavía no lo sabe.
Bueno, la invitación para una serie de actividades que se están haciendo, ¿verdad? Es difícil participar en todas, pero sí relevante, del 30 de marzo al 10 de abril, a nivel nacional vamos a estar haciendo visitas a los congresistas en los distritos. Por lo tanto, acá en Maryland, en Virginia, vamos a estar llevando a cabo las actividades. Están invitados a formar parte de estas delegaciones que vamos a ir a hablar con los congresistas a nivel de distrito para pedirles el apoyo de que impulsen una ley que pueda darle la permanencia a la comunidad beneficiaria del TPS, ¿verdad? Y también pues tenemos un comité que se está fortaleciendo, que es muy importante, sobre todo en este momento que la comunidad está quedando sin las protecciones y está siendo vulnerable. Un comité de aliados, de personas, de ciudadanos, no importa la nacionalidad, no importa la raza, pero que esté dispuesto a trabajar en pro de la defensa, no solamente de la comunidad tepeciana, pero sí de toda la comunidad migrante, ¿verdad? Hay un comité a nivel nacional que está creciendo de manera increíble, y pues hacemos ese llamado, ¿verdad? Que muchas personas que van a acudir a sumarse a esta lucha, y por lo tanto pues también recordar que el día 29 de abril pues no podemos, hay que anotar esa fecha en el calendario para ir a hacer acto de presencia al frente de la Corte Suprema de Justicia y alzar la voz y hacer resaltar las contribuciones tan importantes que la comunidad tepeciana ha hecho. Recordemos, son 17 países que han estado protegidos por TPS. El caso de Honduras por 26 años, El Salvador 25 años y así, ¿verdad? Es más de 1,5 millones de personas que se les está quitando el derecho de la protección. En la historia es la acción más fuerte de desdocumentación, ¿verdad? Se le han quitado documentos a más de 1,5 millones de personas, así que nunca en la historia había habido algo así. Por lo tanto es necesario la organización y apoyar a la comunidad para poder, si no podemos defender el TPS para las personas que ya lo tienen, cómo podemos buscar un alivio migratorio para aquellas personas que no lo tienen. Por lo tanto pues es urgente la unidad.
Y bueno, gracias. Con eso vamos a concluir lo que es este panel de Vivir en Comunidad Bajo Amenaza. Gracias a todos a los panelistas, a mi compañera Rosita, que me va a facilitar esta conversación. Y pues si tienen preguntas o lo que sea, ahí vamos a estar todavía todos acá, ¿verdad? No nos vamos a ir hasta que termine el concierto, ¿verdad? Así de que podemos conversar con nuestros invitados. Y muchas gracias a todos por el espacio y el tiempo que nos han brindado.
Siguiente, vamos a hacer una entrega de una camiseta con la imagen de Monseñor Romero, pero especialmente con el recuerdo de este importante evento. Así que muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a todos los panelistas. ¡Romero vive! ¡Romero vive! ¡La lucha sigue! Por favor, continúen sentaditos. Vamos a hacer un pequeño anuncio y luego vamos a tomar un receso para que puedan comer y buscar alguna de las cosas de abajo. ¿Okay? Antes de comenzar nuestro segundo panel, queremos informarles que la sala en la que se encuentran ustedes ahorita le hemos nombrado el Salón Reverendo Raylan Scott Hagler, quien recién falleció, en honor a su vida y a su compromiso con la justicia. Para quienes lo conocimos, su espíritu se siente presente aquí, y para quienes no, permítanme presentarlo brevemente. El reverendo Raylan Scott Hagler nació en el 1954 y falleció justo este año, el 26. Fue uno de los líderes pastorales más influyentes de Washington, D.C. y un defensor incansable de la justicia social. Dirigió la iglesia Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ por más de 30 años y se destacó por unir la fe con un activismo público valiente, incluyendo su trabajo con la de DC, Poor People's Campaign y el Black Homeownership Strike Task Force, conocido como un pastor fogoso y una leyenda del púlpito en las calles. Dedicó su vida a combatir la desigualdad racial, defender a los más vulnerables y elevar la dignidad de toda persona en el distrito. Quiero recordarles que en el Salón Reverendo Harler contamos con una feria de recursos, comida y un equipo de apoyo para el voto y un espacio dedicado para niñas y niños. El Salón Harler. Ahí hay mesas con recursos que usted puede usar para ustedes o sus familias o las organizaciones con las que ustedes trabajan. Vamos a tomarnos unos 10 minutos. Si quieren buscar algo de comida allá abajo. 5, ok, 5, lo siento.
En una hora viene la segunda ronda de comida. Ahorita hay poquita.
Oh, entonces 5 minutos para que se estiren. ¿Qué les parece? Stretch. 5 minutos. Hay café, hay agua. Gracias.
Hay fruta. Como en una hora llega el resto de la comida.
En una hora vamos a tener mucha más comida calientita abajo, ¿sí? Entonces aguántense un poquito. Y una aclaración, el salón donde estamos ahorita es el salón que se llama Reagan Scott Hallowell. Así hemos llamado a esta salón. Ahora, chicos y chicas, no se quedaron unos minutitos. Tanto los que están aquí, the bathrooms are right here, and the one downstairs. Vayan aquí, a mi izquierda y abajo. Queremos agradecer, hacer un anuncio público que la casa, tenemos comida, vamos a tener la comida abajo y también Comalito que nos donó comida a este evento. Cuando ustedes necesiten ir a comer afuera o hacer celebraciones, pueden ir a Orión Plaza, que está en el bolso del Comalito que está en medio. Hay que apoyar estos negocios de inmigrantes.
Tenemos equipo de interpretación. Esta ronda es no.
Uno, dos, uno, dos. Uno, dos. Manuel, ¿puedes pedirle a la gente que venga a dar eso? Vamos a continuar, por favor. Bueno, vamos a continuar con nuestro segundo panel y este panel nos invita a reflexionar sobre la tensión entre instituciones frágiles y la fuerza extraordinaria que las comunidades crean para responder. Romero creía que las instituciones deben servir al pueblo y que cuando fallan es el mismo pueblo que debe convertirse en la voz moral que empuja a la justicia. Quienes nos acompañan hoy son personas, quienes nos acompañan hoy personifican ese principio. Le damos la bienvenida a Emily Castorius, cuyo trabajo legal, espero que lo pronuncie, cuyo trabajo legal y académico forma a la próxima generación que transformará políticas públicas. A Nike Sabey, una consultora de movimientos dedicada a centrar el liderazgo de jóvenes directamente impactados. Y a Tim, cuya experiencia le da raíz y realidad a esta conversación. Este panel será animado por nuestra moderadora, Frania Clímaco, quien acompañará la conversación y facilitará un espacio de reflexión, diálogo y aprendizaje colectivo. Con su apoyo, la discusión resaltará las experiencias, el liderazgo y la visión de nuestros panelistas, asegurando un intercambio dinámico y significativo para todas y todos. Romero vive. Romero vive. Suban los panelistas.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for that intro. And my name is Diálogo. I will be moderating this panel, which is about DC institutional fragility, how the system is fragile, how it's breaking, how it affects the most oppressed, the most vulnerable, and how amongst ourselves, through our different work that we've done, institutions, and work, how do we come together as a collective, how do we strengthen ourselves, how do we find solutions to these problems and fill these gaps. So thank you so much, we're excited, and we're also doing this in the memory of Monseñor Romero, right? With Romero, we affirm that justice is realized in structures that protect the vulnerable, and when the institution does not feel its mission, it organizes people to thrive it to respond with dignity and responsibility. So the purpose of today's panel, this panel in particular, is to examine how DC institutions fail, where we are fragile in the face of social crisis, and that is security, housing, education, public policies, for example, the basic needs that our communities need, that are being most protected. So how do we find solutions to that? We want to learn how communities, youth, and legal movements build collective power to transform these structures. And we want to identify concrete changes and sustainable community practices. So to do that, we have three amazing panelists today. We have Emily Castorius, sorry, correct. She is the director of the Clinical Legislative Clinic at UBC. Emily is a professor, an assistant professor of law and director of the Legislation Clinic at the David A. Clark School of Law at the University of District of Columbia. She's a legislative and social movement lawyer whose work is based on principles of abolition, harm reduction, justice for people with disabilities, critical race theory, and the intersectional feminism. For 15 years, she has called the district her home and advocates for transforming the criminal justice system and for DC economy. So with a round of applause, please welcome Emily. Thank you. To my right, we have Renee Saray. She is a movement builder based in DC, committed to ensuring that marginalized communities can influence the policies that impact their lives. Her trajectory has focused on the experience over 2 decades of experience in exam education, civics education, and teacher professional development, Tim brings a unique perspective to his new role as co-lead of Ward 8 in the 3DC campaign. He hopes to facilitate an understanding of what a 3DC will look like for anyone, no matter where they're starting from. So please give a warm welcome round of applause to Tim. Thank you all panelists for being here and the audience as well for being a part of this conversation, for wanting to learn. And I know a lot of you are also doing this amazing work, so we're here to learn from one another together. So let's see if this is a collective question. We have a mic here in the middle, and anyone that wants to take the mic and answer, feel free to do so. So the first question is, in what ways is DC institutionally fragile, and where are the cracks most visible?
Okay, yes. Thank you everyone for being here, for inviting us on this panel. I think probably the most obvious thing that all of us would say is that since we are not a state, we are not self-determinant. We can pass laws that are invalidated. We can pass ordinances that are invalidated. And when we seek to provide safety and security for the people that live in DC, that can be invalidated, those basic rights and needs and wants that we have because we are not a state. And so to me, that's the most basic answer for why we have a breakdown in safety and security and in Washington, D.C. So all I was to say, Free D.C., what is Free D.C.? It is really a campaign to help us achieve dignity as human beings, as people in D.C., by being self-determined, by helping with self-determination. So, we can talk more about how that is and how we feel like that's the best way to do that. But here's your answers as well. So yeah, let's get the conversation started. Thank you for the question.
Go.
I'll just add, in addition to overturning laws, there are a couple of particular ways that the federal government can come in and control local government in ways that can't happen in other states. And one of the most important ones we saw happen last year, the first time was the president just took control of our police department. So okay, we don't know what to do now. The legal system in was built with a racist foundation to keep Black people out of positions of power, of leadership, and that has had consequences now. Not just for Black people, but for migrants and anyone else who's at a higher risk of encountering law enforcement on the street.
One of the ways that I'll add that we're institutionally fragile is through our budget. So that's another way that the federal government can directly decide what happens in our community. So even if laws get passed or there is funding that is dedicated to certain causes and certain communities, the federal government can come in and say, you can't use your money for that purpose. It's happened multiple times in the district, which goes completely against what we as a community have decided that we want and what our elected representatives have done on our behalf. And they can come in and say, you can't use your money at all. Last year, I think they froze $1 billion with a B, $1 billion of our local tax dollars. And they said we could not use it. And that came, harmed, obviously, the most marginalized. Because I'm sure we all know that when money has to get cut from the budget, it doesn't get cut from programs or services that help the most vulnerable.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you all have brought a pretty insightful perspective and examples of how the federal government oppresses us locally here in Washington, D.C. because of the lack of self-determination and self-sovereignty, which we see that also reflected in many nations, in Puerto Rico and other countries, and even those countries that do have self-determination and self-sovereignty, we see how the federal government, the U.S., imposes itself in those spaces. And so that is no different than what we're seeing here in Washington, D.C. Historically, and ramped up even more now. When we have these budget cuts, when we have people realizing the lack of power and institutional spaces and also in more local spaces. So as a result, we see communities come together years to educate one ourselves, decolonize ourselves, and build really people-centered power. So if you all can provide some recent examples that shows collective power actually giving us results against these attacks.
I can start with an example. So who in this room remembers the news story from October of last year when a man named Philip Brown was driving to the corner store to get some milk for his kids for dinner? The DC police pulled him over and then HSI shot at him 3 times. People hear about this? Yeah? Okay, so one of the attorneys who I work with actually picked up his case in court and was representing him that day. And Mr. Brown came in after having spent the whole weekend in jail, having been shot at, 2 into the passenger seat, 1 into the collar of the jacket he was wearing, and had gone through an incredible trauma. They walked into the courtroom, they said, yeah, he was being charged with fleeing police. And they said, hey, this is ridiculous. This man was being shot at. How could you possibly charge something like this? And they were going through the documents and saw that actually the fact that he had been shot at was not recorded anywhere. It wasn't in the arrest report. It wasn't in the probable cause affidavit. The prosecutor didn't know about it. The defense attorney, no one knew about it. It wasn't until the judge forced the arresting officer to go and testify that they found out, yes, yeah, Mr. Brown isn't telling a story, this is what actually happened. And this is something that should never happen. MPD has to tell every time MPD uses serious force, discharges a firearm, does anything like that. It shouldn't be that just because it was an officer working for a different agency, we can keep quiet about it, right? And so we decided that there was something that we could do here. There could be some legal way to change what MPD was required to do. And Mr. Brown and his attorneys came to, started talking about what it would look like to change the law, to make those requirements. We brought the ideas to our elected representatives, we brought the ideas to DC, to Families Not Feds. We got a lot of people working together and wrote legislation with our council members that requires MPD to report in their arrest reports, in their probable cause affidavits, and to share any body cam footage of anyone from any agency that is using force on someone here in DC. The bill got introduced. We had maybe 2 or 3 co-sponsors at first. A couple days later, we had 4 or 5 co-sponsors. A couple days after that, when we were walking around the halls of the building, knocking on everyone's doors, we ended up with 9 co-sponsors on the bill. And then the day of the vote, we showed up with hundreds of people in the building. There was a rally out front. The room was packed. People were everywhere. And we ended up, even the people who said that they were against us, I don't know if they changed their mind, I doubt they did, but they were shamed into voting yes on our bill because nobody wants to say no to a room full of righteous people. We won that vote 13-0, and that really is a way of showing the power of the people.
Thank you so much. Yes, round of applause to that. I think that's a great example of how we don't assimilate to this, what they're trying to make a normality. This is not normal, what we're living. And when we come together, when we fight, we win, right? And I think it's important that we all have so much rage and so much also talent and passion and love that this is an initiative, this was a result of when we come together, we fight, we win. So thank you for that.
One example that I wanted to highlight of how community came together in the face of our increased federal occupation starting in last August didn't result in a law being changed. It actually just resulted in collective power changing the material experiences on the ground for young people in the district. So in August of last year, after the National Guard was deployed and after there was the increased presence of federal officers, in addition to all of the existing agents that were operating in the district, a group of organizations, of which Black Swan Academy is one part, but lots of different organizations that work with youth across the district came together to figure out what we could do, like meaningfully do, to make sure that there were safe spaces for young people in the district. Like the migrant community, young people are extremely vulnerable for a lot of the same reasons, right? Voting power, not as much autonomy because of that lack of voting power and that extra vulnerability. And so we came together and thought of a variety of different ways that we could try to keep youth safer. One of those ways was by creating spaces in the community where young people could get together with adult support and guidance, but without federal agent presence or police presence, but that they could still be young, right? Be safe, be with one another. Another way was to have, we organized volunteers to support young people out in the community, especially when they were trying to take public transportation, because there was the increased presence of National Guard and federal agents at metro stations and at other sort of points of public transit. If you might recall, toward the end of last year, there was the National Guard takeover at Union Station, where they were not allowing young people to get in or out of the metro. Same things have happened around Navy Yard and other areas. And so volunteers, adult volunteers, were helping to try to make sure young people could safely get to and from where they needed to go, or call parents if needed, things like that. And then we advocated within the council and still are, but it really helped sort of mobilize the support for young people and get them together, because we convened young people to write a list of demands to our local representatives so that they could have their voices heard as well. And so that's an ongoing effort that continues, and it's still an ongoing effort, but we're really confident that the more young people and other marginalized communities use their voices, the more we can add that kind of pressure that Emily was talking about to make those meaningful changes in the law and to change the material circumstances that we're living in every single day.
Thank you so much. And I think those are great examples too, because we see these curfews pop up, right, from one day to another, that pretty much target Black and brown youth, because there have been videos and it's been documented and people have seen for themselves how people who are not of color, youth that are not of color, are not stopped. They're not ID'd, they're not frisked. They're not taken to a detention center essentially, and they have to sit there and wait for an adult to come pick them up. So you really see that separation of treatment, and also just creating safe spaces, because we don't need more unaffordable housing. We need more safe spaces for our youth to be able to live and be in the city that they were born in. So thank you for that work.
I co-sign both what was just said, both examples, and the example I want to give is a little bit different. When last year, and I think you just referenced this last year, when Congress voted to essentially not allow the district to use money that belonged to the district. One of the things Free DC, now understanding that we do not have 2 senators in the district and we do not have a voting representative in the House, we still sent dozens of people to Capitol Hill to lobby on behalf of the citizens of the District of Columbia. And what I wanted to emphasize is that those people were visible. So yes, telling senators and representatives, we are representing DC, we are representing Free DC, wearing your t-shirt that says Free DC, something as basic as that, but being so visible that it made, the national news. And did they vote to have us strip that money away? Yes, they did. So was it a success in that moment? No. However, I will argue that this year, when Congress asked us to, not to get too far into the weeds, but essentially we changed our tax policy, and Congress voted to say we could not change our tax policy, which would have delayed us being able to file taxes and get our refunds and so on and so forth. Our government decided, our CFO decided, no, we are going to ignore that and we are going to move forward. And I do believe that having free DC out there, having people go to Congress and letting people know, even in our local government, that this is not the reality we want self-determination. I do believe that our advocacy, our visibility last year is starting to change minds in local government, and they can make it work however they want. You know, they can say that it was 30 days or 31 days, like whatever mechanism they want to use. I do believe that us being visible and standing up and saying we are not going to take this, I do think it has an effect on elected officials all the way down to people that work in the Office of Tax and Revenue. And so that's just my example of something that maybe originally last year we would not have considered a success, but that being visible is helping us along the way as we move forward to, you know, actually being self-determinant here in the District of Columbia.
Thank you, Tim.
I just want to add one more thing for this question. It's that whenever you're in a big fight, we don't win immediately. We don't always win right up front. Sometimes it takes battle after battle after battle until you actually make progress. But even the fact of fighting back is a win, because it stops up the machine, it slows things down. It shows that we're not just going to take whatever they see fit to do with us or with our community. And so it matters, even if it doesn't seem like it's making change immediately. The fact that we're standing up with one another in solidarity with each other, even if we don't have the exact same shared experiences, but we want the same things in the end. We want a community that is safe for everyone. We want a community in which everyone is valued, in which everybody feels, you know, worthy and treated well and with opportunities to actually meaningfully thrive. And so us actively fighting for that, whichever way it comes, whether it's through changing legislation, whether it's through building solidarity through mutual aid efforts, whether it's showing up to other people's events, whether it's fighting battles that seem like they're doomed, all of that matters in the grand scheme of things to move us forward and to build together. So just wanted to highlight that sometimes there's a really clear win, and sometimes it doesn't feel like there's a clear win, but the fight itself is a win.
Exactly, yeah, we are a moving train. We are moving 100-some plus miles per hour. I don't know how fast the train goes, but we can't do it without the different pieces, right? And each one matters. And you just had some great words that I think really just embodies who Monseñor Romero was and the work that Monseñor Romero did, not only in El Salvador, not only in his cantones, but globally. I mean, we're Washington, D.C. celebrating his legacy and really embodying that work. Monseñor Romero was part of an institution, a leader in the Catholic Church in El Salvador, and he realized, along with other priests in the institution, that we cannot take the word if we're not doing the work with the community. We cannot do the work in the community if we're not holding the oppressed systems accountable, right? And I think that's a part of the work and the conversation that we're having here. So my next question is, through Romero's lens, how do we understand public responsibility toward vulnerable youth and families? How are we coming together, that responsibility, that collective work, as Monseñor Romero did?
Okay, so the district itself, our community, has actually stepped up quite a bit for young people and for families. And this is tied to our vulnerability as a district, right? Our lack of statehood has actually hindered or harmed our ability for our community to show up for one another. As a community, we decided things like wanting to support people who were housing insecure, wanting to make sure that folks who are who feel like they have to live in the shadows don't have to do that, can get public benefits, can get support, can voice their views through their vote and all of that. And because we are not a state, the federal government is trying to tell us that we can't stand with one another, that we can't support our young people, that we actually have to engage in these really harmful, oppressive tactics like the curfew, when we were advocating in the Wilson building, which is our local, like our city council office. We saw in real time our elected officials getting calls from the from folks in congressional offices saying, if you don't do this, if you don't pass this, we're gonna do something even worse, right? So we as a community are trying to stand up for one another. We're trying to build spaces that are safe and supportive and welcoming for everyone. I think we're trying to find at least a bare, like not a bare minimum, but like a standard of living for one another, where people are, have their basic needs met, have mental health services. The district has piloted many programs for young people and families, including things like intergenerational living, support for young people exiting foster care, things like that. We're trying to make sure that people can get started off the right foot. But then there are other influences coming in that are getting our government to focus on things that benefit people who are coming in as tourists or who are, that those kinds of things are being prioritized. Folks who are coming in as tourists, folks who are coming, who are developers, right, big businesses and things like that. Even though our community, I think, has voiced pretty clearly, we want things like tipped minimum wage so that people can actually earn some sort of a living wage and can support one another and their families. Summer youth employment programs where young people can have active things to do in the summer, learn skills, and all kinds of things that support a really thriving community. And so, I think as a district, we have voiced pretty clearly that we want to be there for one another. We want to create this really thriving, really welcoming community, and just need to be able to have the power and the autonomy to see it through.
As someone who does not have kids, not interested in having kids, but I am so committed to the people who live here, young, old, and in between, right? And there's so much that we can do when we see people in our neighborhoods, building relationships with them, and this goes for kids too. They're people, I know we forget that sometimes. But if you see a group of teenagers who look like they're trying to start a fight on the metro train, like stand up and say something. Be an active bystander. See if you can calm the situation down and prevent the cops from getting called, right? Because that's going to escalate the situation, make it worse for the kids, make it worse for everyone on that train who is now late. There are a lot of even selfish reasons why you might want to do something like that. Check on the kids in your life, your neighbors, see how they're doing, see how they get to school, especially for youth who are vulnerable or their family is vulnerable. We have started like walking buses, right, where you pick up kids at a little house and all at their different homes and walk over to school together. Volunteer. There are like coach a soccer team, coach a personal favorite, but there are so many activities, right? A chess club, Girl Scouts, whatever it is. Like just get to know the kids in your community and be there for them. Show them that there's someone who genuinely cares about them, who is not their immediate family, and that can change so much.
Yeah, just to reiterate what both of you have said, children are world citizens. They have a perception of the world. They have ideas about how the world should be. They have ideas about what their household should be like, what their block should be like. They have ideas about what their school should be like. And they have ideas about what the city should be like. And it is our job to guide them, but also it is our job to give them the tools to eventually start to make change and to realize their own vision. And even if they're not political, even if they don't pay taxes or have a job or whatever the other measurements we have to validate people having an opinion or input, they have those things. They have their own agency. And so I will just speak from being the co-lead of Ward 8 and Free DC. We don't have too many people under 18 coming to the meetings. We did have Black Swan Academy students come before, which was great, really engaged. But whoever comes, one of the things I really like to do is find out from that person, especially if they're a child, what does having a free DC mean for them. And in Ward 8 and across DC, it's very diverse. And I don't mean demographically diverse, I mean intellectually diverse. Everyone has a different idea of what free DC means to them. And we might have 10 people with 10 different ideas, but I think what I'm trying to do as a facilitator is get all 10 of us together to figure out how do we achieve each of those things through collective action. And children can be involved in collective action too, they're not to be excluded. And obviously, the rules are different, and they have school, and we have jobs, and all that stuff. So, but what I do mean to say is, a collective action does mean it's a collective, it's all of us, which it does include young people, middle-aged people, older people. It's really all of us.
Yeah, we were all children once, right? And so we received this world in a certain way, and I think it's that love, that duty, that responsibility, that care to leave it to future generations and better ways as well. So thank you so much for this really fruitful collective conversation. We're going to now move into more individual questions based on people's experience, expertise. And so my first questions are going to go to Emily. So Emily, from your legislative perspective, how are community demands translated into concrete policy proposals within a jurisdiction that is not a state?
We're not a state, but we do still have our own legislative body. Everybody who lives in DC has 5 council members representing them, 6 council members representing them. You have your board representative. There are 4 at-large members, and then the council chair. Don't forget about them, right? You are voting for those people. There's a primary election on June 16th. The next 3 months between now and June 16th are the strongest your voice as a voter, as a resident, is going to be for the next 2 years. So if there's any time to get policy changed, now is that time. And really, it takes sharing and it takes listening. If you are experiencing something, you need to tell people and talk about it and get other people to talk about it. And talk about it until someone comes up with a really good idea. And then when you find that idea, you bring it to the people who have the power to make it happen. That's not always going to be a law change, but when it is, you can bring it down to DC Council, and we work together across, there are so many organizations, so many people in this city who are constantly trying to come up with great solutions for the problems that everyday people here are facing. And so I would just encourage you to speak up. You have expertise in whatever it is that is happening to you. You don't have to have a PhD in it if you're doing it every day of your life. And we want to hear what it is that would make things better for you.
Thank you so much. Yes, you are the expert of what's going on. Emily, my next question is, what structural limitations specifically tied to DC not being a state slow down or complicate the implementation of public policies?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the Home Rule Act makes it so that we do have our own council, we can make our own laws, but Congress still gets to tell us no and slap us down. So every law that we pass, it goes through the same process that you would in a state, or it does at the federal level, right? You have the legislature vote on it, and then you have the executive, the mayor in our case, who gets to sign it or veto it. But after that, it doesn't become law. It goes to Congress. They can overturn it if they want, and then it has to go to the president. So we have a lot of layers happening right now. This has caused legislators and the mayor in DC to be very timid in what they are willing to legislate. They don't want anything to get overturned. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to draw attention to what they're doing. And I think that is the wrong approach. We are never going to win if we're not fighting. We can flood Congress with as many laws as we want to and force them to take the time to use their resources to manage us if that's what they really want to do. So we should be passing as many laws as we can Another thing that we can do is pass laws on an emergency basis. That means that the law goes into effect just for 90 days, but Congress doesn't get to overturn emergency laws. So that's something else that we've really been using as a tool and a tactic to get around the congressional role.
And my final question is, how would the landscape change for vulnerable communities if DC were to landscape to it?
On one hand, everything changes. On the other hand, nothing changes. The other statehood in and of itself is it's a concept, it's words on paper, it's a structure of government. It's government, halfhood, what we want to believe it. And that's going to be our responsibility when we get there. The way that we get statehood is not the daily start by I need to elect leaders who are going to use their power on behalf of the people who live here. We need to elect leaders who are willing to brave and to keep fighting. Our fight will not be over just because we're a state, and we will have a lot more decision-making authority. And I think one of the most important things is that we will be able to hold our leaders and the decision makers accountable. Right now, someone can, one of our council members can vote away if we don't like to take them out and vote them out of office. But where other states have an elected district attorney who prosecutes all the time. Right now, our chief prosecutor is appointed by the President of the United States. Has no connections to DC whatsoever. Does not care at all think of her or what she's doing. Right? We have no way. We can't remove her from office. We can't even show up at her office and knock on her door. There's nothing we can do to change her mind about change her doing. And so that's really the core of statehood, is having leaders that are accountable to the people.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Emily. Thank you. Now we're going to transition into Nate, Black Swan Academy. My first question is, which youth organizing strategies have shifted narratives or just DC? Indeed.
A few examples of young people organizing that have shifted narratives and or policies include police schools. So if you remember, there was a concerted effort around the country actually for young people to get to students to get police out of their schools, because police being physically present in schools, it made school discipline become a criminal issue. Right? Young people being criminalized for behaviors in schools, and it made particularly vulnerable young people, specifically Black youth and Latinx youth, feel vulnerable because they were the ones being targeted the most. All of the research shows that negative policies, or like strict zero tolerance policies and disciplinary policies, are implemented more against Black and brown youth than anybody else. And so they, across the country, but also specifically here in DC, young people led a campaign to try to get police out of their schools so that school discipline was handled only internally inside schools. They won. In, I believe it was 2021, the DC Council agreed to sunset, what's called sunset, so gradually stop placing police officers inside of schools over a few years. Unfortunately, there was a lot of noise made at the federal level, and because the federal government doesn't have as much power in states as they do locally in the district, there was pressure put on, right, the district as a whole when anything had to do with policing. So that includes the Police Free Schools movement, and I believe it was last year or a couple years ago, they ended that. They repealed the sunsetting of police officers being in schools, so there still are some MPD officers in schools, but young people fought and they won. It was temporary, technically. However, if anybody's paying attention, MPD is actually having some challenges hiring new officers and refilling those seats. So in practice, the win continues, right? There are still fewer officers in schools than there were before. That's one just really important example that highlights the youth-led effort. Another ongoing effort that young people are leading right now is to change the narrative around young people in the district and what they're doing. right? So much of the news coverage, so much of the conversation at the government level is, painting young people as a problem that needs to be solved, rather than recognizing the humanity of young people. We all were children at one point. It's one of the few things that we have in common, right? Like everybody was young at some point, and everybody remembers what it's like to grow, to be able to make mistakes, on some level, and to grow through that, to learn through those experiences. And right now, and for a long time, we've seen that not everybody is afforded that ability, right? Not everybody is allowed to be young, to learn through their experiences and to make mistakes. And so young people are advocating for their needs to be met directly. This week, actually, there was a roundtable held at the DC Council, and over 150 young people signed up to testify in front of the DC Council. And each of them testified about different parts of their experiences as students and as young people in the district that they wanted to see either continued or changed. And it was so beautiful. There were young people as young as 9. There were children as young as 9 testifying in front of the DC Council, knowing that they can't vote, knowing that they don't directly pay taxes and all that, but they still showed up to use their voice and to be able to speak directly to those with power over them. And that helps to shift the narrative as well, that young people are not constantly just looking for ways to, be up to no good or to just be starting trouble. They're actively fighting for what they know they need, and sometimes that fight might look a little bit different than one would expect, but they're voicing what they need in all of these different ways. And it's really beautiful to watch when they come together to use their voice.
Thank you so much. And that is just also a testimony of our elders doing that work too, right? Who a lot of them started so young and are still putting in the good fight. So my question is, how do we ensure that